The Last Letter Never Delivered, 1863. Part 1. The Letter. On a freezing winter night in 1863, a young railway mail carrier received a letter unlike any he had ever seen. There was no name, no address, only one haunting sentence: "Deliver only if I never return." But before we uncover the mystery behind that unforgettable letter, if you enjoy relaxing historical stories, please like this video, subscribe to Sleeping History, and turn on the bell so you never miss another journey into the past. Now, dim the lights, get comfortable, and let tonight's journey begin. The winter of 1863 arrived earlier than anyone in the American frontier had expected. Long before Christmas, heavy snow had already buried the mountain roads. Pine forests stood silent beneath thick white blankets, while narrow railroad tracks disappeared beneath layers of ice. Every evening, the lonely whistle of a steam locomotive echoed across the frozen valleys before fading into the endless darkness. Far from the busy cities stood a quiet railroad town called Ashwood. It was a small place with wooden homes, a tiny church, a blacksmith shop, a general store, and a modest railway station that connected the town to the rest of the country. After sunset, Ashwood became almost silent. Store owners locked their doors. Children hurried home before the cold became unbearable. Warm lanterns glowed softly behind frosted windows. The only sounds that remained were the distant wind and the slow ticking of the station clock. Everyone believed the mountains belonged to winter after dark. Everyone, except one man. His name was Daniel Carter. At just 28 years old, Daniel worked as the railway mail carrier. Every evening, while the rest of the town settled beside warm fireplaces, Daniel prepared for another overnight journey through the mountains. His work was simple, but important. He carried letters. Letters from fathers serving far away. Letters from mothers waiting for news. Letters between brothers, sisters, friends, and families separated by hundreds of miles. Daniel believed every letter carried a small piece of someone's heart. That was why he treated every envelope with extraordinary care. For 5 years, he had never lost a single letter, never missed a train, never failed a delivery. The station master often joked that Daniel protected the mail better than soldiers protected gold. Daniel would simply smile. "People can replace money," he once replied quietly. "They can never replace the words they never receive." On the evening of December 18th, 1863, the station looked no different from countless winter nights before it. Steam drifted gently above the platform. Railway workers pushed heavy carts filled with leather mailbags. Passengers stamped their boots against the frozen wooden boards to shake away the snow. The station clock slowly approached 8:30 p.m. The last train of the day would soon leave Ashwood. Daniel carefully inspected every leather mailbag before loading it into the railway post carriage. Each bag carried the name of a different town. Each seal had to be checked twice. Everything appeared perfectly ordinary, until someone stepped onto the platform. Daniel noticed him immediately. The stranger wore a long dark wool coat covered with fresh snow. His boots were worn from a very long journey. A wide-brimmed black hat hid much of his face. He carried no suitcase, no blanket, no luggage, only a single weathered envelope. Without speaking, the stranger walked directly toward Daniel. His footsteps made almost no sound on the snow-covered platform. For a brief moment, neither man spoke. The stranger simply held out the envelope. Daniel accepted it politely. "Where should I deliver this?" he asked. The stranger remained silent. Daniel looked down at the envelope. There was no address, no destination, no sender's name. Only one sentence written in careful black ink: "Deliver only if I never return." Daniel frowned. "I'm sorry, sir. I don't understand." "WH. Part 2. The Last Train. The great black steam locomotive pushed deeper into the frozen wilderness. Its iron wheels echoed across the snow-covered rails as thick white steam disappeared into the endless winter sky. Inside the railway mail carriage, Daniel Carter carefully arranged the leather mailbags on heavy wooden shelves. Every sack carried letters filled with hope, love, fear, and prayers. Some would bring joyful news. Others would change lives forever. The rhythmic sound of the train slowly filled the carriage. Click, clack, click, clack. It was a sound Daniel had heard thousands of times. Usually, it brought him comfort. Tonight, it did not. His thoughts kept returning to the mysterious envelope resting safely inside his leather satchel. Deliver only if I never return. The words echoed again and again inside his mind. Who would write such a message? Who was the silent stranger? And why had he disappeared so quickly? Daniel gently removed the envelope from his bag. The paper felt unusually old. It was thicker than an ordinary letter, slightly yellow with age, and sealed with dark red wax bearing a symbol Daniel had never seen before. A small lantern surrounded by pine branches. He turned it over carefully. Nothing. No name. No address. No clue. He almost opened it. His fingers rested lightly on the wax seal. Then he stopped. Opening another person's letter was against every principle he believed in. Slowly, he returned it to his satchel. Outside the small frosted window, the landscape grew darker. Towering pine trees stood silently beneath heavy snow. Frozen rivers glittered beneath the pale moonlight. Occasionally, Daniel could see lonely cabins in the distance, their windows glowing warmly against the endless white wilderness. Inside the passenger coaches, life continued peacefully. A little girl laughed quietly as her father showed her snowflakes collecting on the glass. An elderly woman slowly knitted a wool scarf. Two young soldiers spoke softly about returning home after many months away. A traveling doctor carefully organized his medical bag. No one seemed worried. To them, this was simply another winter journey. The train crossed its first wooden bridge just after 9 o'clock. Below, the river had frozen into solid ice. The old bridge creaked beneath the enormous weight of the locomotive. Daniel paused his work and listened. Everything sounded normal. The engineer had crossed this bridge hundreds of times. Still, something about tonight felt different. The wind outside became stronger. Snow struck the windows harder. The telegraph poles beside the railway disappeared behind a curtain of white. Far ahead, lightning briefly flashed behind the distant mountains. No thunder followed. Only silence. Then, a sudden knock echoed against the door of the mail carriage. Daniel looked up. Another knock. Slow. Steady. 3 times. He opened the heavy wooden door. No one stood there. Only the freezing wind rushed inside, carrying fine snow across the floor. He stepped onto the narrow platform between the railway cars. The train continued moving through the darkness. He looked toward the passenger coaches. Everything seemed peaceful. He looked toward the locomotive. The engineer remained focused on the tracks ahead. There was no one outside. Puzzled, Daniel closed the door once again. Perhaps the wind had been responsible. He returned to his work. Minutes later, the knock came again. This time, louder. Daniel's heartbeat quickened. He slowly approached the door. For several seconds, he simply stood there listening. Silence. Then, almost without thinking, he unlocked it once more. The freezing air rushed inside. Still, no one. But something caught his attention. Lying quietly on the wooden step outside the carriage was a single white feather. Fresh, perfectly clean, untouched by snow. Daniel picked it up carefully. He looked around once more. Nothing. No birds. Part 3. The Mountain Pass. The train climbed steadily into the mountains. Outside, the world had become almost completely white. Snow fell so heavily that the rails ahead disappeared beneath a moving curtain of ice. Even the locomotive's powerful headlamp struggled to pierce the darkness. Inside the engine cab, engineer Thomas Whitmore, a veteran of nearly 30 years on the railroad, leaned forward with both hands firmly gripping the controls. He had crossed these mountains hundreds of times. Yet something about tonight made him uneasy. "The storm is building too quickly," he said quietly to his fireman. The younger man nodded as he threw another shovel of coal into the blazing firebox. "We've never seen snow fall this hard before midnight." The locomotive released a deep whistle that echoed through the valley. No echo came back. The mountains seemed to swallow the sound. In the railway mail carriage, Daniel finished securing the leather mailbags. The mysterious envelope remained safely inside his satchel. For some reason, he found himself checking it every few minutes, almost as if he feared it might disappear. He walked to the small frosted window. Outside, nothing but snow. The pine trees looked like silent giants standing guard over the mountain pass. The wind howled across the cliffs, shaking the train as it struggled uphill. Daniel whispered to himself, "Just one more mountain, then we'll be halfway." He had made this journey many times before, but tonight, the silence felt different. In the first passenger coach, the atmosphere was still calm. A mother gently covered her sleeping daughter with a thick wool blanket. The elderly gentleman removed his glasses and quietly read a small Bible beneath the warm glow of an oil lamp. One of the young soldiers smiled as he looked at an old photograph of his family. Across the aisle, the traveling doctor carefully closed his medical case before resting his head against the window. No one realized how close danger had become. The train rounded a sharp curve overlooking a deep frozen valley. Thousands of feet below, a river lay hidden beneath thick ice. Engineer Whitmore reduced the speed. The rails here were narrow. One mistake could be fatal. Suddenly, the locomotive lurched. Not violently, just enough for every experienced railway worker to notice. Whitmore frowned. "Did you feel that?" The fireman looked ahead. "I did." Whitmore carefully applied the brakes. The train slowed to a crawl. Steam drifted past the windows like ghostly clouds. Everything became strangely quiet. Daniel felt the change immediately. The steady rhythm of the wheels had disappeared. Instead, there was only a slow metallic scraping beneath the carriage. He opened the small side window. The freezing wind struck his face. He looked toward the front of the train. The engineer had stopped. Passengers began looking through the windows. Some whispered to each other. Others remained perfectly still. No one panicked. Not yet. Engineer Whitmore climbed down from the locomotive carrying a bright railway lantern. Snow reached almost to his knees. The fireman followed close behind. Together they carefully inspected the rails. For several minutes neither man spoke. Then Whitmore suddenly stopped. His lantern trembled slightly in his hand. About 30 yards ahead, the snow covering the railway had collapsed. The mountainside above the track showed fresh scars. Large rocks, broken trees, and tons of packed snow had slid across the railway only moments earlier. The avalanche completely blocked the line. The engineer slowly removed his hat. "There is no way through." Back inside the train, Daniel saw the engineer returning. One look at his face told him everything. Something was terribly wrong. The station clock back in Ashwood was now many miles away. The nearest town lay beyond the blocked mountain pass. The telegraph wires beside the railway har. Part 4. The Stranger in the Snow. For several long seconds, no one moved. The strange sound came again. Slow, steady, Crunch, crunch, crunch. It was unmistakable. Someone was walking through the deep snow. Engineer Thomas Whitmore lifted his railway lantern higher. The warm light barely reached beyond the swirling blizzard. The passengers inside the coaches held their breath. Daniel Carter stepped carefully out of the mail carriage, pulling his heavy wool coat tightly around him. The freezing wind stung his face like tiny needles. Snowflakes covered his hat almost instantly. The mysterious footsteps continued. Closer now. Crunch, crunch, crunch. Then, out of the white darkness, a lonely figure appeared. The man wore a long black wool coat covered with snow. A wide-brimmed hat hid most of his face. His boots were old and worn. In one hand, he carried a weathered walking stick. In the other, an antique brass lantern. Its warm golden light shone steadily despite the powerful wind. Daniel's heart skipped a beat. It was the same stranger. The man who had handed him the mysterious letter only hours earlier. Without speaking, the stranger walked calmly toward the stranded train. Not once did he seem to struggle against the storm. It was almost as though the mountain itself welcomed him. Engineer Whitmore stepped forward. "Sir." The stranger stopped. "The railway is blocked," Whitmore said. "You must return. It's too dangerous." The stranger looked toward the mountains. Then he quietly replied, "I know." His voice was calm, gentle, almost comforting. It was the first time anyone had heard him speak. Daniel hurried closer. "You gave me this letter." He removed the weathered envelope from inside his coat. "I don't understand what it means." The stranger looked at the envelope for a long moment. Then he smiled very faintly. "You will." Nothing more. No explanation. No name. Only those two words. "You will." The wind howled louder. Snow covered their footprints almost as quickly as they appeared. The stranger slowly raised his lantern and looked toward the blocked railway ahead. "The mountain is not finished tonight," he said quietly. "There will be another slide." Engineer Whitmore frowned. "How could you possibly know that?" The stranger did not answer. Instead, he began walking toward the avalanche. Daniel watched him disappear into the blowing snow. "Wait!" Daniel shouted. The stranger never looked back. Within seconds, he vanished once again into the blizzard. Only the faint golden light of his lantern remained visible between the trees. Then, even the light disappeared. Silence returned. No one spoke for nearly a minute. Finally, the fireman broke the silence. "Should we follow him?" Engineer Whitmore slowly shook his head. "In this storm, we'd never make it." Just then, the mountain answered. A deep rumble echoed high above the valley. At first it sounded like distant thunder. Then it grew louder, much louder. The ground beneath the train began to tremble. Snow fell from the pine branches. Passengers screamed. Whitmore's eyes widened. Everyone back on the train. The rumble became a deafening roar. Thousands of tons of snow and rock broke free from the mountainside. The second avalanche had begun. Part 5. The Avalanche. The mountain exploded with sound. A deafening roar echoed across the frozen valley as thousands of tons of snow, ice, broken trees, and jagged rocks thundered down the mountainside. "Brace yourselves!" Engineer Whitmore shouted. Passengers grabbed their seats. Children cried. The locomotive's whistle screamed through the storm, but the sound was swallowed by the avalanche. The earth itself seemed to shake. Daniel Carter threw himself against the wall inside the mail carriage as the train rocked violently beneath him. Leather mailbags crashed from the wooden shelves. Letters scattered across the floor like snowflakes. For several terrifying seconds, no one knew whether the train would remain on the tracks. Then, silence. Only the fierce wind remained. Daniel slowly opened the carriage door. The storm still raged, but the avalanche had stopped. Engineer Whitmore stood ahead of the locomotive, his face pale beneath the lantern light. Daniel hurried toward him. What happened? Whitmore pointed ahead without speaking. Daniel raised the lantern. His heart sank. The second avalanche had buried nearly 100 yards of railway beneath an enormous wall of snow and shattered pine trees. Even worse, the avalanche had destroyed the wooden bridge just beyond the mountain pass. Without that bridge, the train could not move forward, and with the first avalanche blocking the track behind them, they could not go back. The train was trapped, completely trapped. The passengers slowly stepped outside, wrapped in thick blankets and heavy coats. They stared silently at the destruction. No one spoke. Everyone understood the same frightening truth. Help would not arrive tonight. Perhaps not even tomorrow. The nearest telegraph station was more than 20 miles away. The telegraph wires had already fallen beneath broken trees. The horses used by the railway could never survive a journey through this storm. Night grew darker. The temperature dropped even lower. Snow continued falling without mercy. Inside the passenger carriage, the traveling doctor checked on the elderly passengers and the children. A railway worker lit additional oil lanterns. The young mother held her little daughter close, whispering comforting words as the child slowly fell asleep. Despite the danger, a strange calm settled over the train. Daniel returned to the mail carriage and gathered the scattered letters one by one. Every envelope represented someone's hope, someone's family, someone waiting for news. Then his hand touched the mysterious letter once again. The envelope was completely dry, untouched. Although dozens of letters had fallen across the floor, this one had somehow remained exactly where he had placed it. Daniel stared at it. The stranger's words returned to his mind. You will. Outside, Engineer Whitmore studied the blocked railway. There is only one chance, he said quietly. If someone can reach Black Ridge Station before dawn, they can send help. One of the railway workers looked toward the mountains. In this storm, Whitmore nodded slowly. It would be the hardest journey any man has ever attempted. No one volunteered. Everyone knew what such a journey meant. Deep snow, freezing temperatures, hidden cliffs, and another avalanche could strike at any moment. Daniel looked toward the endless white wilderness. Then he looked down at the mysterious letter in his hands. For reasons he could not explain, he felt that his journey had not begun when he boarded the train. It had begun the moment a silent stranger placed this letter into his hands. At that exact moment, a faint golden light appeared far away between the snow-covered pine trees. A lantern, moving slowly through the darkness. The same lantern, the same stranger, standing on a narrow mountain trail, as if he had been waiting for Daniel all along. Part 6. The Lantern Through the Storm. For several seconds, Daniel could not take his eyes off the distant light. The lantern glowed softly through the blizzard. It neither flickered nor disappeared. It simply waited. Do you see that? Daniel whispered. Engineer Whitmore narrowed his eyes. I do. The fireman looked into the storm. I don't see anyone. Only Daniel and the engineer could clearly make out the warm golden light between the snow-covered pines. It was exactly the same lantern the mysterious stranger had carried earlier that night. Without another word, Daniel tightened the scarf around his neck. I'm going. Whitmore immediately grabbed his arm. Going where? To that lantern. The engineer stared at him in disbelief. You'll freeze to death before you've gone half a mile. Daniel slowly reached into his satchel and removed the mysterious envelope. I don't know why, but I believe this letter is leading me somewhere. Whitmore looked at the envelope, then at the endless storm. Finally, he sighed. If you go, you may never come back. Daniel smiled faintly. If I stay, none of us may leave these mountains. The old engineer remained silent. Deep inside, he knew Daniel was right. The broken bridge meant rescue could only come from Black Ridge Station. Someone had to cross the mountains. Someone had to survive. The passengers watched quietly as Daniel prepared for the impossible journey. The traveling doctor handed him a small leather pouch. Bandages. You'll need them. An elderly woman removed her thick wool gloves. They are warmer than yours. One of the soldiers quietly offered him a strong walking stick. The young mother approached with her sleeping daughter wrapped in blankets. Please, come back safely. Daniel nodded. I'll do my best. Engineer Whitmore unlocked a small wooden storage box inside the locomotive. From it, he removed an old brass railway compass. My father carried this for 20 years. Tonight, you'll need it more than I do. Daniel accepted it with gratitude. He placed the compass beside the mysterious letter inside his satchel. Then he took one final look at the stranded train. Dozens of frightened faces watched from the frosted windows. Children, families, railway workers, travelers. Every one of them was hoping the young mail carrier would somehow find help. Daniel opened the carriage door. A blast of icy wind rushed over him. Snow reached almost to his knees. The cold stole his breath. Still, he stepped forward. One step, then another. Behind him, Engineer Whitmore raised his railway lantern high into the air. We'll keep this light burning, so you can find your way back. Daniel looked over his shoulder and smiled. Then he turned toward the distant golden lantern. It seemed no closer than before. Yet somehow, he knew exactly which direction to walk. Minutes passed. The train slowly disappeared behind the storm. The only sound was the wind. The only light was the mysterious lantern waiting somewhere ahead. Suddenly, Daniel stopped. Fresh footprints crossed the snow. They had appeared only moments earlier. One pair, leading toward the forest. He knelt beside them. The prints matched the worn boots of the silent stranger. Daniel stood again, holding the compass in one hand and the leather satchel in the other. He quietly followed the footprints into the dark pine forest. Behind him, the last steam train waited in complete silence. Ahead, the greatest mystery of his life had only just begun. Part 7. The Cabin Beyond the Pines. The footprints continued through the silent forest. Daniel followed them carefully, one step at a time. Fresh snow covered the ground so deeply that every stride demanded all his strength. The wind had grown quieter beneath the towering pine trees. Only the soft crunch of his boots broke the silence. The mysterious lantern still glowed somewhere ahead. Sometimes it disappeared behind the trees. Then, a few moments later, it appeared again. Always just far enough away to keep Daniel walking. He checked the old brass compass. The needle pointed steadily north. Yet something felt strange. The path before him seemed to twist in impossible directions. Several times Daniel looked back. The footprints behind him had already vanished beneath fresh snow. There would be no easy way back. He was completely alone. Or so he thought. A raven landed silently on a snow-covered branch above him. It watched him without making a sound. Daniel smiled faintly. You're the only company I've had all night. The bird tilted its head. Then, without warning, it flew deeper into the forest, in exactly the same direction as the lantern. Daniel continued walking. Nearly an hour passed. His boots were soaked. His hands had grown numb despite the thick wool gloves. The cold reached through every layer of clothing. Still, he refused to stop. The passengers on the stranded train were depending on him. Every step mattered. Finally, the trees began to thin. Ahead, Daniel noticed the outline of a small wooden cabin. Its roof was buried beneath heavy snow. Smoke rose gently from its stone chimney. A warm yellow light shone through a single frosted window. Daniel stopped in surprise. Engineer Whitmore had said no one lived in these mountains. Yet here, hidden deep within the forest, stood a lonely cabin. The mysterious lantern rested beside the wooden door. Its flame burned calmly. The stranger was nowhere to be seen. Daniel slowly approached. He knocked 3 times. No answer. He knocked again. The old wooden door creaked open by itself. Warm air drifted outside. Inside, a fire crackled quietly in a stone fireplace. A kettle gently steamed above the flames. An old wooden table stood in the center of the room. Everything looked neat. Everything looked lived in. But there was no one there. Daniel stepped inside cautiously. "Hello." Only the fire answered. His eyes slowly wandered across the room. An old railway map covered one wall. A shelf held dozens of weathered books. Near the window stood a polished brass telescope pointing toward the mountain pass. Beside it rested a leather journal. Daniel carefully picked it up. The cover was cracked with age. Inside the front page were only 7 handwritten words. Some letters carry more than words. He turned another page. Every page that followed described terrible winter storms, train schedules, mountain paths, avalanches, and rescue routes known only to a handful of railway workers. Whoever had written this journal knew these mountains better than anyone alive. Daniel continued reading until something slipped from between the pages. It was an old black and white photograph. His heart stopped. The picture showed a railway crew standing beside a steam locomotive many years earlier. At the center of the group, holding the very same brass lantern, stood the mysterious stranger. Daniel looked closer. Written beneath the photograph were the words, "Black Ridge Railway, Winter of 1839. Daniel stared in disbelief. That was impossible. The man who had given him the letter looked no older than 50. But this photograph had been taken 24 years earlier. How could it be the same man? Before Daniel could gather his thoughts, the cabin door slowly closed behind him. Not with a slam, not from the wind, but gently, as though someone unseen had quietly stepped inside. Daniel turned around. The room was still. Part 8. The Keeper of the Letter. The footsteps continued. Slow, steady, unhurried. Daniel remained perfectly still. The warm fire crackled softly behind him, but every other sound inside the cabin had disappeared. 1, 2, 3. The footsteps stopped at the top of the wooden staircase. For several long seconds, nothing happened. Then an elderly man slowly descended the stairs. His silver hair rested beneath a worn black hat. His long dark coat looked almost identical to the one worn by the mysterious stranger. In his right hand, he carried the same antique brass lantern. Its golden flame burned quietly. Daniel stared in disbelief. It was him. The same face, the same calm eyes, the same gentle expression. The stranger looked at Daniel and smiled. "I knew you would find the cabin." Daniel finally found his voice. "Who are you?" The old man did not answer immediately. Instead, he walked to the fireplace and carefully placed the lantern beside it. The room became even warmer, even brighter. "My name no longer matters," he said softly. "What matters is the letter." Daniel slowly removed the mysterious envelope from inside his satchel. "I've carried it safely. I never opened it." The stranger nodded with quiet approval. "I knew you wouldn't." Daniel stepped closer. "Please, tell me what's happening." The old man looked into the fire. Many moments passed before he spoke again. 24 years ago, a terrible avalanche buried a train not far from here. Daniel listened carefully. There were more than 60 passengers. The storm was worse than tonight. There was no telegraph, no rescue team, no hope. The old man's voice became quieter. "So I walked, alone, through the mountains, for 14 hours, to reach Black Ridge Station." Daniel remembered the old photograph. The man in the picture. "That was you." The stranger smiled gently. Yes. I reached the station. Rescue arrived. The passengers survived. Daniel's face brightened. Then you're a hero. The old man slowly shook his head. No, I returned too late. My wife died before I came home. Silence filled the cabin. For the first time that night, Daniel understood the sadness hidden behind the stranger's eyes. The old man looked toward the envelope. She wrote that letter. Daniel looked down. My wife knew I might never return. So she gave me one final letter. But I could never bring myself to read it. Daniel frowned. You carried it all these years. The old man nodded. I believed. If I never opened it, she would always be waiting for me. The fire cracked softly. Snow tapped gently against the window. The stranger closed his eyes for a brief moment. But time cannot wait forever. He looked directly at Daniel. Tonight, my journey ends. And yours begins. Daniel held the envelope carefully. What do you want me to do? The old man answered without hesitation. If I do not return, deliver the letter. Daniel looked at the words written across the front once again. For the first time, he truly understood their meaning. Deliver only if I never return. Those words had never been written for the past. They had been waiting for this very night. Just then, a powerful gust of wind shook the cabin. The lantern's flame flickered for the first time. Outside, somewhere beyond the forest, the distant whistle of the stranded train echoed through the mountains. The passengers were still waiting, and dawn was now only a few hours away. Part 9. The final delivery. The cabin fell silent. Only the gentle crackling of the fire disturbed the stillness. Daniel Carter looked down at the weathered envelope resting in his hands. 4 hours. That single letter had been nothing more than a mystery. Now, it had become a promise. The old man slowly lifted the brass lantern. Its warm golden light filled every corner of the cabin. Come, he said softly. There isn't much time. Daniel followed him outside. The blizzard had weakened. Snow still drifted through the air, but the violent wind had almost disappeared. Above the mountains, the clouds slowly began to break apart. For the first time that night, Daniel could see the moon. Its pale silver light covered the valley like a blanket. The stranger walked with surprising confidence through the forest. He never looked at the ground. He never hesitated. It was as though he had memorized every tree, every stone, every hidden path. Daniel hurried beside him. Who taught you these mountains? The old man smiled. They've been my home for almost my entire life. After nearly half an hour, they reached a narrow cliff overlooking the valley. Far below, Daniel finally saw it. The stranded steam train. Its lanterns still glowed softly against the snow. Tiny figures moved around the locomotive, trying to keep warm. They're still alive, Daniel whispered. The old man nodded. But not for much longer. He pointed toward a narrow trail carved into the mountainside. It was almost invisible beneath the snow. That path leads to Black Ridge Station. Daniel stared at it. You mean there was another way all along? The old man lowered his eyes. Very few people ever knew it, and fewer still could survive it. Daniel looked at the steep trail. It twisted along dangerous cliffs before disappearing into the darkness. One mistake, one loose step, would send a man hundreds of feet into the frozen valley below. The old man placed the lantern into Daniel's hands. Its brass frame felt warm despite the freezing air. Take it. Daniel looked surprised. What about you? I won't need it anymore. Daniel hesitated. "This belongs to you." The old man gently shook his head. "No, it belongs to the man willing to walk into the storm for others." For several seconds, neither man spoke. Finally, Daniel accepted the lantern. Its golden light seemed brighter than before. The old man stepped back. "You must go now." Daniel looked at him. "And the letter?" The stranger smiled peacefully. "When the sun rises, you'll know where it belongs." Daniel wanted to ask another question. He turned for only a single moment, looking toward the narrow mountain trail. When he looked back, the old man was gone. There were no footprints, no sound, no movement, only the silent forest and the falling snow. Daniel stood alone. The lantern burned quietly in his hand. He whispered into the cold night, "Thank you." Then, without another moment of hesitation, Daniel began climbing the hidden mountain path toward Black Ridge Station. Behind him, the stranded train waited in darkness. Ahead, the first faint light of dawn slowly touched the snowy peaks. For the first time all night, hope had returned. Part 10. The Last Letter Never Delivered. The first light of dawn slowly touched the snow-covered mountains. Daniel Carter had been walking for hours. His legs ached. His boots were soaked. Every breath burned in the freezing air. Yet he refused to stop. The old brass lantern guided him through the narrow mountain trail. Its warm golden light seemed brighter with every step. As the eastern sky turned pale blue, Daniel finally saw a wooden sign buried beneath the snow. Black Ridge Station. He had made it. Without wasting a single second, Daniel ran toward the station. The station master, awakened by the pounding on the door, rushed outside in surprise. Good heavens! What happened? Daniel struggled to catch his breath. The Ashwood train. It's trapped beyond the mountain pass. The bridge is gone. There are families. Children. They need help immediately. Within minutes, the station burst into life. The telegraph operator began sending emergency messages in every direction. Railway workers prepared rescue sleds. Strong horses were harnessed despite the freezing weather. Doctors packed blankets, medicine, food, and hot water. Before sunrise, the rescue team had already begun climbing toward the stranded train. Daniel watched them disappear into the mountains. For the first time since leaving Ashwood, he smiled. The passengers would live. Several hours later, Daniel returned to the lonely cabin. He wanted to thank the mysterious old man. He wanted to return the beautiful brass lantern. Most of all, he wanted answers. But when he reached the clearing, the cabin was gone. There was no chimney, no fireplace, no footprints. Only untouched snow stretched beneath the silent pine trees. Daniel stood frozen. Had he imagined everything? Then he looked down. The brass lantern was still in his hand. It was real. Everything had happened. His eyes fell upon the mysterious envelope. For a long time, he simply stared at it. Finally, he remembered the stranger's final words. "When the sun rises, you'll know where it belongs." Daniel looked around the clearing. Near the tallest pine tree stood a small stone marker almost hidden beneath the snow. He brushed away the ice. The inscription slowly appeared. William Ashcroft, 1812 to 1863. Railway guide. He saved many, and asked nothing in return. Daniel's heart became heavy. The stranger had not disappeared. He had come home. Daniel knelt quietly before the stone. With great care, he placed the weathered envelope beneath it. He never opened it. Some words, he believed, belonged only to the people who had written them. He placed the brass lantern beside the stone. Its golden flame burned quietly in the morning light. For several peaceful moments, Daniel closed his eyes. The mountain was completely silent. Then, a gentle breeze passed through the pine trees. The lantern flame flickered softly. When Daniel opened his eyes again, the flame had gone out. Weeks later, the rescued passengers safely returned to Ashwood. Everyone called Daniel a hero, but whenever someone thanked him, he simply smiled. "It wasn't me," he would say. "I only followed a light." No one understood what he meant, and Daniel never tried to explain. Many years passed. The old mountain railway was rebuilt. New trains crossed the pass. Children grew old. New generations were born. Yet railway workers continued telling one story every winter. They spoke of a lonely lantern that sometimes appeared during heavy snowstorms, guiding lost travelers toward safety. Some believed it was only a legend. Others believed it was the spirit of a man who had devoted his life to saving strangers. No one ever proved either story. But every winter, someone claimed to see the warm golden light shining quietly between the snow-covered pine trees. As for the mysterious letter, no one ever read the words inside. It remained. The last letter never delivered. And perhaps that is why its story has never truly ended. Thank you for joining tonight's Sleeping History Journey. If you enjoyed this peaceful story, please like, subscribe, and we'll meet again in the next journey into the past. The end.